Hello ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the recap videos. This is the second round of the candidates, and today again we are going to look at the decisive game. On social media I have seen a few YouTubers who are also doing recaps, asking questions like, do I do the boring win or the exciting draw? And to my mind, that's a nonsense question, because this win by Hikaru was by no means boring. In fact, I found this game hugely fascinating, and to be perfectly honest with you, I found both the Fabiano and the Duda game so mind-bogglingly complex that, yeah, I would have a difficult time to give you a breakdown of those games, that's for sure. So, Hikaru Radjabov. It started off as a Berlin, the mandatory Radjabov opening, aiming for a rock-solid draw, but Hikaru was in a fighting mood, perhaps after his defeat in the first round, and so we transitioned into this d3 bishop c5 variation. All of this has been seen, and in fact, Hikaru prepared a novelty, because all the way up to now, we are following many top Grandmaster games. The most notable one is a Caruana Kramnik game that actually Caruana did win, but Hikaru also had this with white against Aronyan, and here only knight f3 and a4 have been played, but now Hikaru came up with queen h5. This was the novelty, and although this move doesn't quite cut it, in terms of playing for a real advantage, it certainly did throw Radjabov. The curious thing is that Radjabov played here rook queen c6 followed by a d5 sec a couple of moves later, and according to the extremely cruel engine, d5 is already the way to go, and I find this variation so immensely educational and instructive. So what Black says is this: I would rather have a lot of aggression, activity and initiative, but lose material than not. And in many ways this reminds me of the trendy Marshall Gambit games, where Black just sacks a pawn and the two bishops just prove to be enough compensation against the bishop-knight combo. And here too, after queen d5, bishop g4, Black sacks another pawn and then just casually plays rook f8, and believe it or not, 2 pawns down, Black is actually just a tiny bit better here, and it is white who really needs to look out, because the various tactical ideas with kicking the queen with rook e5 and bishop e2 are actually very powerful indeed. This, however, wasn't played, so queen c6 was played, rook e1, rook e8, and knight f3. Now this is a really awesome pawn sack. Of course, on elite level this is not even a question that e4 can't be captured, but on lower levels it is a temptation to take this, because it doesn't seem to be losing to anything instantly. And after rook takes queen takes knight g5, of course Black can just drop back, cover the mate, cover f7, and no worries. The refutation is a little bit more complex than this. It is actually bishop f4 completing development and threatening with takes, and then rook e1, and then rook e8 mate. And since Black cannot mobilize with the c8 bishop in one move, now this is a world of trouble. And if they play d5 here, then we play knight g5, and if they take, we take back, and now we have triple threats, and that, ladies and gentlemen, is as good as it gets for white. This is all over Red Rover. So after bishop f4, potentially best is h6, and here comes the really amazing move, my favorite, the icing on the cake, because our job is to deny the development of this bishop, and that is accomplished by the sensational bishop d6. And now this is Kaputski, because Black can't develop the rest of the army, and of course rook e1, queen d6 falls for an absolutely stunning checkmate like this. So there was a fair bit of fire in this game behind the scenes, of course, but this is typical with these very high level games, that the juiciest stuff usually stays unplayed, and yeah, we need to uncover them in the post-mortem. So d5 was played here, and Hikaru took with the pawn. The engine claims queen to be better. I'm not going to argue with that. Take, queen c4, h3. At this stage, Radjabov is playing good chess too. Queen f3, rook e8, bishop e3, tuck, tuck. And here, curiously, the super logical rook e5 was a mistake that remained unpunished. Hikaru responded with d6, but here apparently rook d1 is playable. And there are two tactical justifications to this. Both of them are marvelous. One of them is that if queen a2, we have got knight d3. And all of a sudden, this rook doesn't really have a lot of good squares to go to, especially in light of knight c5 and then d6, d7, d8. And if takes, then we have e4, rook back, knight c5, rook takes, oopsie, sorry, rook takes, queen takes, and it turns out that the bishop is lost because of the back rank threat. Wow! Now that is deep stuff, not easy to find, even for a top GM. And secondarily, also, there is rook f5 here to reckon with. Excusez-moi. Rook f5. When the equally shocking rook d4 needs to be found. And if queen a2, then queen g3, throwing in a mate threat from here this time round. And after h6, knight d3, rook d5, knight c1. Rounds off this variation with a white, well, I don't want to call it a win, but a potentially winning exchange up scenario. Now, either of these lines are really tough to find, and actually white needed to find both in order to play rook d1, so he needed to find a refutation for queen a2 as well as for rook f5. It's easy to fall short there. d6, queen d5, and now we are entering this endgame where white is slightly better. There were a few very nice trickeries going on here. Rook e6, rook c7, rook d6. Wait a second. What am I talking about? There was a line here. Oh, yes. I wanted to show you if bishop c6 here, then there is d7. And that is marvelous. And the pawn runs away with the W. So f6 had to be played. Now, king f2 seems more natural, but rook c5 is fine too. Rook back, rook c7, tuck, tuck. And now we are in this endgame, which is materially even. But this is not an easy draw by any stretch of the imagination, because the knight on d4 has a marvelous square, and the rook is a lot more active than the black one. So holding this with black is not easy. h5, g5 looked a bit more natural to me, by the way, keeping all pawns off of the bishop's color as best as we can help it, because now h4 fixed this pawn on white. g5, g3, king f7, king up, king up, king up, rook d5, rook a7. And now there begins a fair bit of toing and froing. b3, bishop e6, rook c7, rook back, rook check, king back, bishop back, and rook takes. Now, Hikaru managed to win this pawn. However, even that doesn't necessarily secure the draw if black manages to mobilize on the king side on time. And he's gonna get mighty close to it. Takes, rook e4. According to the engine, this is a crucial mistake. And Hikaru plays correctly for a while, and then comes the mistake. So here after bishop g4, again, a bit of a ringa-ringa-rosy begins where the rook and the bishop are chasing each other. Here, there's an important move, b4, to be played. And from what I understand, based on the rest of the game and the other variations, the only thing this move does is that eventually, when we take b5, excuse me, this pawn is going to be one step closer to touchdown. And that's hugely instructive. The engine's main line goes with king f7, rook h8, bishop d1, takes on b5, rook takes h4, and then knight d4. And now you see the importance of this move. The pawn is one square closer. And this is vitally important. And in fact, in the game, Radjabov had very realistic drawing chances. After rook d5, bishop back, rook c5. And eventually Hikaru ended up, after a lot of toing and froing, like I said, he ends up, actually he still plays a3, which is a bit meh, but okay. And eventually he takes on b5 and allows the capture of the h4 pawn. And this is a super fun and exciting endgame to watch it to unfold, because it's still mighty difficult to evaluate correctly. Because given that there are passed pawns on either side of the board, the number of pawns, strictly speaking, is not hugely relevant. It is relevant, but not necessarily as important as it would be in other times. Black has a bishop, which is definitely superior to a knight, because it can hold these pawns and support, for example, from here, and support the progression of this. And the black king appears to be more active than the white one too. Let's see how it unfolds. Knight d4, rook check, king at g3, rook d2, c4. You see again how much better it would be to have that pawn on b4, which we could have had. c4, rook check, king up. According to the engine, by the way, this is still a draw. So watch. Bishop f7, mistake. Rook c3 actually stops all 3 pawns. A remarkably awesome move. If a4, we actually get to take. A really awesome tactics. And after takes, push, black just goes behind the pawn. And now white can't undo this pickle where the rook has to guard both of these guys. And the king is also pinned. And if the king starts walking down out of the pin, then we go check. And the king can't really approach the rook, because then the pawn starts rolling down. So this is a forced draw, and a very beautiful at that. Also, if we play c5 here, then comes bishop f7, and again, the rook is stuck on the 5th rank, having not enough squares. It has to go somewhere, anywhere, and after rook takes c5, it's already white who has to watch out. So this is actually a remarkable positional domination here with rook c3. Fantastic idea. Absolutely next level stuff. Instead, bishop f7 was played. Rook d8, rook d1, a4, rook check, king g3, h4 check, king g2, and that was another mistake, by the way, according to the engine, who really wants either king f4 or king f2, staying on the dark squares. King g2, and here comes a fabulous drawing idea, rook b1. And again, note how Radjabov misses the mark by 1 square. And what he does is super logical, because the rook on c1 again denies both pawn progression. However, after a5, we have got a big problem here, and I'm going to show you what that big problem is by demonstrating the idea behind rook b1. If they go a5, you go king g5, and now white is stuck, because if I start progressing the pawn, then king g4, and then I will have a check here, and that is the decisive factor, the main difference between the rook here and the rook here, that when Radjabov played here rook c1, he deprived himself from this check. And so now Hikaru could go a5, king h5, king f2, king g4, rook f8, and yeah, now the problem is that this bishop is stuck. If I go, let's say here, rook check, king f4, and the rook comes back home, which is yet another amazingly useful motif, and now the rook is stuck. If I trade, we just trade, and this pawn, with the support of the other 2 pawns, is gonna run away with the game. And now holding these 2 is super easy. And if the rook goes to c3, then it's extremely awkwardly jammed in and has nowhere to go. And after something like rook e1 denying the escape route of the rook, we are going to win again. A sensational and very accurate calculation by Hikaru here. And so after rook f8 came h3. That was a desperation move. Takes h2. And after the check, yet another very accurate move. There was nothing left in the tank. King h3, rook check, picks off the pawn. Whereas king f4, knight e2, check, king e5, and knight g3 denies the pawn from promoting. Note that, of course, we can't take the rook because of queen. But after knight g3, if they promote the queen, that is just a completely winning king and rook ending. With the 2 extra pawns, it's just all over a6. So Radjabov tried check and then take. But after the pawn marched up to a7, That was all she wrote. A couple of more moves, and then Radjabov resigned, seeing knight here, rook here, and queen being unstoppable. A very, very fine endgame technique in a really messy endgame, where Hikaru exploited Radjabov's minor inaccuracies in a marvelous fashion. Unfortunately, I can't say the same about fellow countryman Richard Rapport, who did miss winning opportunities against Alireza Firouzja in a better endgame as well. So the tournament is still wide open. Lord knows what's going to happen, who is going to win. It is way too early still to guess. So I'm super excited to see what round 3 may hold. Be sure to stay with me and follow me through the tournament. Please don't forget to like, to sub, and to super like if you would like to express your gratitude that way. I will see you in the next video.